and think all of the same things
Yeah.
as you do. It's important to get those other sides. Hold on.
Chew. Bless you.
Oh, thanks. I think it's important to get those other sides because it would be an incredibly boring show if for every single book we were like, we
We
like
just
the exact
agreed.
same
Yeah.
things. Um, we have the same exact points, all of these things. And so there are going to be videos and episodes and stuff where we're, debating and everything like that. But the rule of thumb, right? If the video makes it up and you listen to it, we are good.
Yeah.
Any videos that happen and they don't make it up, right?
You know.
Then that's it.
Put it together. You
But
figured it out.
yeah, but that's just wanted to put that out there before we dove into this one because it'll kind of be along the same thread
Yeah.
of thoughts, right?
Yeah.
One of the first things I want to say though about Blood Promise away from the relationships and stuff like that is one,
Mhm.
I think this is one of my favorites of the series.
It's my favorite of the series so far.
And two, what I find really tiresome though about YA books is this need to consistently repeat past plot points,
Yeah.
like recaps.
Yeah.
There's one thing to give flashbacks because they're adding to a scene that we didn't originally see and stuff like that. Like
Mhm.
we get a lot of flashbacks building that relationship between Dimitri and Rose.
So many.
Um yeah, so we get a lot of those flashbacks, which obviously from those two different points of views, like I've compartmentalized. I'm viewing this from an adult lens, but knowing that the kid and teenager in me had read
Yeah.
it and loved it, so I'm not going to sit here and ever pretend that I didn't. But what was really annoying, and they did this a lot towards the beginning and kind of throughout the book, is every single book gives you a recap of what happened in the book before
Mhm.
or a recap of like who a character is. Like if I have to be explained to one more time about why people don't trust Christian, I might lose my mind. Because every single book, it's like people treat him differently because and then it's like there's only two ways that one becomes Strigoi, and then they go through the story again with Christian's parents.
Mhm.
And I understand that it comes with the genre because it's meant to be those young adults. It's meant to be the people that might not have first off, like they're not rereading them back to back like we are. So some of them might need that recap, but it's another thing I think that is kind of a detriment to teenagers and young adults is this belief that they are not smart enough to remember what was in the last book that they read
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
series. Um and it almost is doing them like a disservice because they're not able to just rely on their own memory and their own comprehension skills, and they're like, "Oh, I'll be reminded of what's going on in that next one." And that might once again just be the educator in me being like, if you hold their hand throughout that process, you're not teaching them how to be independent from it. Um so that was incredibly annoying for me. I have a lot more notes for Blood Promise than I did Shadowkiss because Shadowkiss is definitely not one of my favorites of the series. I liked it for its foreshadowing and the stuff that we talked about. But I think the later books are some more of my favorites. Like they lean higher. Vampire Academy is high up there because of the nostalgia and kind of the
Right.
world building that happens, but
Yeah.
these last like 3 books really like hold my heart because one, the characters are getting older, so they're kind of growing into I want to say like their personalities. Like Rose is finally getting to the age in this events that she's been acting because of all the trauma she's been put through, so it starts making more sense why she's making the decisions she's making. And I think Lisa is finally gaining some character growth after being like stunted. It's not enough in this book at least to really gain any favor for her, but like in the next couple books she really I think grows not into my like favorite character position. I think that's always going to be Rose. Um But it's also it's basically her story. Like the story of Vampire Academy is very sold to you as a story about two best friends, but ultimately it really is Rose's story as she's going through this, which is really interesting given that throughout this society, the Moroi are considered like more important, like they come first is kind of this whole big slogan, but the story is told through Rose and her
Mhm.
experiences. So talking about those flashbacks, we get a lot of flashbacks that build
Way too many.
the moments between Rose and Dimitri that we
Way too
didn't
many.
get. Because Rose, like we said in the last video, has gone off to find Dimitri as a Strigoi to end his life because she knows that that is what he would want. So she finds herself in Romania, I believe. Or is it Romania? No,
Russia?
Russia?
Russia, my love.
Mm-hmm. The Moroi are mostly Romanian, which is where I
Mhm.
was. Yeah. So she finds herself in Russia, and she has been leaving a string of Strigoi bodies everywhere she goes because she's by herself. And so
Right.
Strigoi are kind of viewing her as easy prey. And then they attack her and she kills them after doing some questioning and all of these things. Um, One of my favorite parts about this book is the fact that we get introduced to Sydney Sage, who is
Love
a
Sydney.
who is an alchemist. And what's really cool about her, so I think the introduction of her is really fun, but it also brings in a big plot hole,
Mhm.
I think, in the fact that like she comes in and she's like, "Yeah, we alchemists are basically the cleanup squad
Right.
for the guardians and everything. If a Strigoi is killed or something like that in public, like we're the ones that get called in to take care of it, right?" You would think that this would be mentioned
That
at
would have
least
been
in
mentioned.
passing.
Yep.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like I wouldn't have needed it to be something that was like built big into anything, but
Right.
especially in like Frostbite when Dimitri and Rose find that
Mhm.
entire like house of people. I don't know if the alchemists weren't brought up because it was like a private residence and all of those things. Like I don't remember if they're just brought up for the public endeavors. Um but so we find out Sydney Sage is basically doing her internship where she's from like Ohio or something,
Yeah.
some state, and she ends up being sent there to do her internship. And she tracks
Utah, I
down
think?
yeah, that would make sense because she's heavily religious. So I had a moment in one of my notes where I was like, is Sydney Sage Mormon? Um and then yeah, it was just a moment because she was like, anyways, I digress. So we get introduced to her. Rose is kind of with us in terms of finding out what an alchemist does at the same time. Um, she's on a quest, right? So she
Right.
is dealing with this thing, but then also routinely going back and visiting Lisa through her eyes to kind of just check in, make sure she's cool. Um, and we end up meeting
Avery.
the Avery, so Avery Lazar and her brother Reed, who their father has taken over as like dean of the school,
Mhm.
basically. And immediately you kind of get the like danger, danger, Will Robinson feeling about
Uh-huh.
Avery, but you're not quite sure to like pinpoint why. You know,
Mhm.
it's very much like, oh, she might be a pawn of Tatiana's that's there to like
Right.
keep Lisa in check. And that really makes sense. I remember writing down like I remember something is up with Avery and Reed, but I don't remember what it is. Um And you kind of see that growing. Adrian has been visiting Rose in her dreams because remember, he's basically funding this. And I like that despite the fact that he's funding this, she's not like taking advantage of the money. Like she's being very like frugal and
Yeah.
conscientious of where it goes, which I liked because she did not gain any favors with me with how she got the money. But I did like that she was at least aware enough of like, this isn't my money, so I'm not just gonna like blow it all off because I have it.
Right.
So I did like that. He is visiting her in her dreams and trying to like prod information of like where you are and stuff like that. And she's like, no, I can't do that. You'll send people, like all of these things. And she's hunting Dimitri. She ends up in his hometown, right? Which she at that time is kind of like, oh, it's interesting that I ended up here. Like the world must be really working in my favor, whatever. We find out that a Moroi named Abe is actually the reason she ended up there because when she passes out from her wounds after a
Yeah.
Strigoi attack, she keeps saying Belikov, so they end up at Dimitri's house.
Yeah.
And we meet his family and they're lovely.
They're so cute.
They're super cute. The grandmother is very funny because she's Russian, right? But she's still very like Latinx coded in
Yes.
the like I'm going to pretend to not speak English.
Yes.
because it's simpler that way. Because my grandmother 100% does that anytime somebody calls on the phone that she doesn't wanna talk to. And so that was really cute, but we meet, like, Dimitri's siblings, we kinda figure out the uh relationships there and the fact that they're living a very unorthodox life because they're going to school to learn how to be guardians and stuff like that,
Right.
but they're living in a like Dampier like community.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more freedom there for them in terms of, okay, you don't want to be a guardian, you can just live here, you can get a job, all these things. She meets um another spirit user and her husband who are bonded, and so that's
Yep.
pretty cool. It's just kind of a different way of viewing things. Oh, so we get a lot of kind of information as to how Dimitri was raised. It kind of makes sense as to why he's a little bit more open-minded than a lot of the guardians in terms
Mhm.
of like Dampiers, and that they don't have to become guardians. They can, do other things and stuff like that. We see the complicated relationships between the sisters. So you
Yeah.
have one who has already had her child and she's, I think her name's like Carolina or something.
Mhm.
And then you have Sonia who is pregnant, and we don't really get a lot about her. We just know that she's pregnant and she's living her life. Then
Yeah.
you meet the younger one who I think is Victoria.
Victoria. Mhm.
She she's funny to me because she reminds me a lot of like
Rose.
Rose, and I was also gonna say, like, book 1 Lisa
Mhm.
in, like, "I'm here for you, however, the moment you upset me, things are not
Mhm.
good," right? And so she's dealing with a very, like, normal, I think, teenage angst situation where she has a boy that she has a crush on, but she's not able to look past the, like, rose-tinted glasses of, "He might only be interested in me, for this one thing, and once he gets that one thing, he's probably not gonna be interested in me anymore." And Abe, who is this kind of mysterious Moroi figure that kind of just keeps popping up. He's telling
Oh, it's
Rose
not
like,
that
"Oh,"
mysterious.
but he's painted as like, "Oh, he's this like
Mhm.
mobster person," and stuff like that. And he tells Rose like, "I was hired basically to make sure you got back to St. Vladimir's, make my life easy and just do that thing." He's very like cold and callous
Mhm.
to her, and she's like, "This is weird because like I don't know you, dude." Um, so a lot of things kind of start happening, and then he ends up making a deal with her to kind of keep Victoria safe of, I will make
Mhm.
sure that this Moroi gets away from her, because we find out it's a little bit more scandalous than it already seemed, because this Moroi is the father to Sonia's child.
Yeah.
But Sonia has not told anybody, probably out of like embarrassment and shame and all of these terrible feelings. But because of that, Victoria is not aware,
Right.
right? And so Rose is like, I'm not going to let this happen. And then she and Victoria end up on really terrible terms, because Victoria's like, "I have no idea why you just, like, blocked me from
Yeah.
doing this." Um, so she ends up leaving with a group of Dampier that are, like, going out and hunting Strigoi, which is really interesting because
Not good at it.
they're not good at it, like, at the very least, if you're doing this thing, you should be good at it, right?
Right.
But they're not good, they're kind of
Are not
just
good.
they're just having, like, a pissing contest with, like, the other Dampiers and being like, "You guys are weak and you're afraid,"
Mhm.
but they're, like, rushing into every situation, and it's
Mhm.
overall not good. Um, Backing up for a second, the, like, funeral scene that the family does for Dimitri was incredibly sad
It
because
boggles my mind that they didn't know about it until Rose told them.
I think it makes sense, because they make a point of saying, like, "We have lost track of, like, what his assignments were."
Mhm.
Um, and Dimitri did not seem like the type that would try to, like, worry them. And then I think also from, like, a publicity standpoint, right? St. Vladimir's is not going to want people to know that it was their school that
Mhm.
Strigoi, like, walked into, you know? So I think it was all kept very silent. Um, and it also just maybe wasn't something that anybody thought was important enough. I think there's this whole stigma within like the Dampier community of like if you're guardian and you're lost in battle kind of thing, that's something you signed up for.
Right.
And so I think it really shows the lack of care from the higher ups in terms of guardian relationships and stuff like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I think it made sense. But so they have the guardian scene, the funeral scene, and Rose is basically treated as like Dimitri's widow, which once again
Yeah.
I think is like why it made sense to me why Dimitri tried to put up that boundary but was unable to because he was constantly raised in these like unorthodox way of doing things.
Mhm.
And once again, was not a good age gap. Would much prefer if this age gap did not exist. Like
Right.
I've read some really cool fan fictions recently of Rose and Dimitri that did not have age gap, and those chef's kiss were great. Um, and so she ends up leaving with this group of like not great Strigoi hunters, right? And she
Right.
very quickly takes a charge because she's like, "Oh God, I'm the only one that really like knows what's going on and like how to really effectively deal with these things." And
Plus
the
she has
first
her internal tracker.
yeah, which is yeah, so she ends up feeling nauseous whenever a Strigoi is nearby, which is really handy. You know, I think that's a
Yeah.
cool little perk if you're gonna
Nobody
be in
likes
this
being
job
nauseous.
line.
So
Yeah, like that's really handy. And so she ends up they find a Strigoi and she does what I think anybody would expect from her, and she basically tortures him and then says, like, you know Belikov, which means you need to tell him that like Rose Hathaway is looking for him
mhm.
and all of these things. On the other side of the world, back in I think they're in Virginia or something. No, where are they? Where's St. Vladimir's?
In Montana,
Yeah, I was like, it was somewhere in that version. The reason I said Virginia, I think, is because the Queen's Castle and stuff is in
near
like
Pennsylvania, yeah.
yeah, it's in that area. But on that side of the thing, Lisa's being weird,
Mhm.
and Lisa's starting to drink a lot more often. Avery is kind of pops in and she immediately puts her eyes on Adrian and he welcomes it. He's like, I think in his head, he's like, the one girl that I've been interested in recently is like constantly shutting me down. So this cute girl shows up and is flirting with me. I'm going to flirt back and all of these things. And so Lisa's drinking more often. They go to the court, the like royal court, and she ends up kissing Aaron and
Her
like a
ex-boyfriend.
her ex-boyfriend in like a drunk moment or whatever. And what's interesting is knowing what we know about why that was all happening.
Yeah.
When I was going through and reading it, right? Obviously at that point I had already remembered what was going on. It was interesting to see the kind of like the points in her inner monologue where you can kind of see that compulsion coming in and changing the way she like views things because she
Right.
was like, "Oh, like this shouldn't be a thing that I'm doing because like Christian exists." And then you see like in the next little section, she's like, "Oh, but it's just a kiss among friends. It's no big deal." And like
Right.
all of these things, you kind of see the hand that is shaping what she's doing. Um, and so Avery is essentially keeping Lisa drunk all of the time.
Yes.
And we find out later on that it's because Avery is a spirit user and
Yes.
is
Compelling.
compelling Lisa to be kind of the wild and crazy Moroi royal that she
Mhm.
used to be, compelling Adrian to like her more than he already did, like
Mhm.
he was definitely interested in her, but she like knocks it up a couple notches in order to get her plan moving. We find out that she is bonded to her brother and her guardian,
Mhm.
um, which is kind of interesting. And then
They're both shadow kissed.
they're both shadow kiss, and so that's kind of why they're both kind of losing their mind because they're taking all of that darkness from Avery
Mhm.
constantly. And she's like using them for their energy and their power and all of those things. Um, so anyways, Rose ends up finding Dimitri, or really Dimitri finds her, and she hesitates. It's that pivotal moment of here's your chance to get rid of him. You've come all
Mhm.
this way to do this thing. And then she hesitates. And I don't blame her for it because that's a hard thing that she set herself out
Yeah,
on. She was like,
right.
"This is the man I love. I need to kill him because he would want me to." But it's one thing to think that, it's another thing,
To
especially
actually
because
do
like the
it.
Strigoi are like the boogeyman of their world, right?
Right,
Like none of them have ever been in like long conversations with one. It's always been like quick attacks, quick fights, somebody is dead, it
right.
ends kind of thing. So she has that moment of being able to really just see him, and she's surprised at how similar he still looks apart from his eyes and all of those things. So
Right.
she hesitates and he knocks her out and sets her up in like Barbie's gothic dream house. And it is odd because
Mhm.
any of the boundaries that this man tried to keep up while human are completely gone now as a Strigoi. Like she's like, okay, like you have me here, just kill me. Like she's kind of accepted defeat. And he's like, I can't now, like I've seen you, like I can't do it anymore, whatever. And he very quickly is like, I want to be with you, I want you. But in order for that to happen, you have to be a Strigoi. And she's like, oh heck no. I might be crazy and foolhardy, but I'm not that crazy and foolhardy. No, thank you, sir. And he doesn't take that well.
No.
Once again, is
He honestly becomes such a more interesting character
yeah,
as a
and
Strigoi.
that's what I'm saying is he as a Strigoi, right, changes the script
Mhm.
of what a Moroi and what we as the audience believe to of Moroi or of Strigoi. Um, they're not just these like mindless, bloodthirsty murderers. They're
No.
still basically who they were as humans or as Dampier, but they don't have that extra barrier of empathy and that extra
Right.
barrier
They don't
of
have to deal with morality.
yeah, they don't have to deal with any of that because they're already what was considered, you know, their pinnacle of evil. And
Right.
so he really changes the script. He shows that he still likes westerns, he still has the same hobbies, he thinks the same way, right? And I even wrote down like if he wasn't a Strigoi, what he was saying and how he was treating her pre bite, right? So
Right.
not to fast forward, but pre-bite would be incredibly romantic and like I want to be with you. I want our lives to be together. Like I don't want to
Mhm.
be apart from you. All of the like he's saying all the right things, right? He ends up biting her
Yep.
and once again we get that reoccurring theme that was pushed on us from earlier in the series of like since like practically day one of there's a stigma in the Dampier community of what they call blood whores, right? Which are basically just Dampiers that let Moroi bite them.
Yes.
And it's like heavily frowned upon. It's heavily taboo. It's talked about in every single book. You know, it was really leading up to this moment of Rose basically falls apart
Yeah.
at this bite because not only was it stronger than a Moroi bite, right? But it's also Dimitri, and she's dealing with that
Yes.
impact of I've been wanting to be with him for so long. He's finally here, and he
Mhm.
Strigoi are not as scary as they seemed, you know, in our stories in school. You know, he still looks like him. He still has the same mannerisms and all of these
Right.
things. So it's really difficult for her. And 100%, he becomes a lot more interesting of a character because he's I think point blank and right, he talks more. We
Yeah.
get more of his thoughts. We get more of his thought process. We can kind of see how his brain works. You know, he's
Mhm.
like, I wasn't given a choice to become this. And even though I believe now that this is a better way of being, right? I would want you to have that choice. So I'm giving you the choice, right? But it's not really giving her a choice
No.
because he's like, I'm giving you the choice, but if you give me the wrong answer, I'm going to do it anyway. But I would rather it be because you want to be like this. And um I think like he like the little things that he did as a Strigoi that really show a little bit more, not like a human side, obviously, because of what he is, but like when Nathan comes in and seems like threatening, he like stands in the way of him and Rose.
Mhm.
Little things like that. Like I think I would also struggle in Rose's position, forgetting the age gap. Like if this was just somebody that I was romantically interested in, and then this is the situation I found myself in, I would 100% be struggling because you like finally are getting everything that you want, right? And then also just in that moment of like needing to survive.
Right.
Like it'd be incredibly difficult for me to be like, "Oh, I don't know if my morals would win out." If I like was like, "I really want to I like living." And if living means I have to become this terrible thing, and I get to be with the person that I've been wanting to be with for so long. Like I understood why Rose really struggled, but there's a big part of the book where she is with Dimitri. He's basically feeding off of her, they're making out. They're not having sex because he's kind of using that as a bargaining chip for her.
Mhm.
Um he's being very cold and calculating kind of thing. And then when she finally, I think, comes up for air and is like, "Oh God, like, what am I doing?" And she finally decides, like, I'm gonna hopefully get him to stop biting me. I need to be kind of clear minded here. All of these things. I liked, I liked seeing her kind of return to herself.
Yeah.
Of she has that moment where she like looks at herself in the mirror and she's like, "Oh, I look like a blood whore." Mind you, us at Margin Mavens, we don't slut shame anything like
Nope.
that. We're just using the term that was given in the book. Um, and so she has that realization and it kind of like shocks her awake of this is not Dimitri. Like this
Right.
is not what I want. And so she starts coming up with this plan to get out and she stabs him with a chair leg. Right? You could tell it catches him off guard, which is
Mhm.
cool because she was never able to really, like, catch him off guard in terms of in their
In
trainings.
their training ever.
Yeah, and so the fact that she's able to do that was fun. Um, and then she thinks that it worked. She gets out, doesn't work. He, like, as she's actively trying to kill him, is like, "You're amazing," and I found that really funny because he is still so proud of her for the fact that she's able to do this thing, but he's
Right.
like, "Gosh dang it, like, I'm gonna have to kill you if you don't stop this." But
Right.
it is kinda cool that you're, like, this
So
strong
strong.
still. Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
it was fun, for doing that. Then she escapes, they run into Nathan, and forgot the lady's name.
Ina? Oh,
Galena?
Kalina.
Yeah. She was Dimitri's mentor. She ends up becoming a Strigoi. So when he becomes one, he immediately knows he can go and see her. And Dimitri shows up after
Mhm.
she had thought that she had killed him. He is
Mhm.
not dead. He shows up when she's about to fight Galena and ends up fighting Galena for her, which is not surprising because we already knew that his end goal was turn Rose, they kill Galena, they take over her stuff. Like
Yeah.
he had a long-term, it was kind of endearing in like a murderous way of I have these plans to take care of you, but I need you to take this next step first and then
Right.
you'll be taken care of for the rest of our immortal lives. Um and so they end up working together to kill Galena, which hurt a lot because you saw that despite all of the differences in the world of distance between them,
Right. They
they
still could
still
communicate.
they still could communicate without those words and all of these things. Um and then as they're escaping, they're basically overrun or as she's escaping, they're basically overrun with more Strigoi. And
Mhm.
he, and she has that moment, which once again, the foreshadowing. Like Richelle does such a good job at low key foreshadowing. I think sometimes in a series, especially in a book, you'll see a sentence or a scene and it like is like a blaringly obvious like, oh, this is something that's coming up later. but I think she does a really good job at including both the blaringly obvious and the subtle foreshadowing. Um, and so in that moment, he's got like 4 Strigoi on him. They make eye contact, and Rose has that realization of lesson 1 with Dimitri,
Run.
of don't hesitate, run. And she knows that that's what he's trying to tell her, because despite their kind of relationship drama in that moment of, oh, the love of my life is trying to kill me right now, he still doesn't want her to die at anybody's hand but his.
Right.
Like he's still hoping that he can convince her to change into a Strigoi. So he looks at the odds and he's like, okay, if this does not go well, if this fight with these 4 guys doesn't go well, she can't be here. And so she runs. They end up on like a bridge. He's chasing her,
Mhm.
and she once again is asking him,
Why
like,
do you
why
want
do you
me?
want to be with me? Yeah, why do you want to be with me? And it's funny. I think any woman reading this book knew what the right answer was.
Yeah.
Right? So we're constantly just waiting for him to be like, it's because I love you. It's because,
Right.
you're the love of my life, something. And he's just like, because I want you. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so she's like, oh, that's like the wrong answer. And uses that moment to basically like try to fall off this bridge, and knowing that he would come grab her. And so she stakes him and misses,
Mhm.
right? But enough that it like hurts. But what hurt me is that moment where she does it, and he, right before she does it, she says like, I will always love you, and he goes like, that's what I was supposed to say. Of that realization for him, I think, of like, oh, that was the answer you were looking for. Like, we would probably not be in this situation right here if I would have just said that.
Right.
Um Backing up a little bit, there's a very important scene in this book where they are talking, and he notices a ring that she is wearing that was given to her by a spirit user. And he basically takes this ring off, and he's kind of fiddling with it as he's talking to her. And she notices, and we notice, that when he's fiddling with this ring, he seems almost normal again, despite the fact that he isn't.
Mhm.
He's like checking in with like the different family members, and he's asking, not just like, oh, cool, my family's still alive. Like, he's asking for like details.
Specific details, yeah.
He's specifically asking for details. He's talking
Like,
about like,
"Oh,
what are their
Carolina
names? Yeah.
had her baby. What was
And
it?"
it's
Yeah.
like a very normal conversation, and
Mhm.
it's, once again, this is one of those like blaringly obvious foreshadowings. Um and so they have that moment, and then my favorite scene of the book is the like spiritual showdown that happens between Avery, Lisa, I forgot the lady's name.
Uh,
Um
it's Mark and
yeah. Yeah.
where's
So
the
the
full name of the book? Hold on.
the pair of the spirit user and her bonded husband, they are working together basically. So Rose,
Oksana?
yeah, Oksana. So she's the one that gives Rose the ring. And, or well, Mark, I think, gives her the, I don't know. One of them gives her the ring.
Mark gives her the ring because it's one that, Oksana created for him because Mark
Yeah.
takes
Her
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 darkness
stuff. Yeah.
and she, like, heals it from him.
Yeah. And so we find out that there is a way for Rose to not get that same fate that Anna Shadowkiss got from, Vladimir and stuff like that.
Right.
So anyways, Rose peeks in to Lisa's brain, right? Cuz she's like, things are a little familiar. I've peeked into her brain at one point and I was pushed out, right? And so Rose is like, wait, did Lisa push me out? And we find out that Avery is like some bona fide spirit user,
Yeah.
which is another plot hole, because, like, how does she know how to do the things that she knows? Right? Like, because her abilities go so much farther than just healing. Like, her abilities are, she can prod into people's mind, she can push people out of other people's mind, like she can go on like a spiritual attack. And I'm just kind of curious, like, how all that happened. But I digress. So Rose peeks into her mind, into Lisa's mind, is pushed out again. Lisa is like on the edge of a building. And so Rose is like, okay, I obviously can't get to her right this second. but maybe we can create some sort of weird bridge and I can go in Lisa's brain and Oksana can go in my brain and we can do something like that. And it ends up being like a spiritual showdown. Like
Yeah.
Avery is trying to get Lisa to basically off herself so that she can bring her back so that they can be bonded and Avery becomes this like juggernaut of skill and power and all of these things. Don't really know what her end game was in terms of like why she would want that juggernaut power, if it was just the power, if she had something greater, no idea. Um but Oksana ends up kind of helping Lisa and lending power and then Adrian shows up and also lends that power and he gets into a physical fight with one of the men and all these
Mhm.
things end up, working out. Lisa is saved. Uh Abe returning to him gives Rose a scarf because she looks cold, right? Which on that first read through, especially I think as a teenager, I think I would have picked up on it more if I was an adult reading it for the first time, but like
Oh,
as a
I picked
teenager.
up on it right
Yeah,
away.
like as a teenager, especially I think one who wasn't really paying attention to anything other than uh like the Dimitri stuff.
Yeah.
That was the moment when he put the scarf on where I was like, "Oh, this isn't like just like a random job for him. There's some sort of like connection here." Um and so we find out when Rose gets home and talks to her mom that Abe is actually her father.
Yeah.
And Rose is like, "Oh, so like you had to have been the one to hire him." And she was like, "Nuh-uh,
No.
ma'am.
Yeah.
He was going out of his way to do that because you're his kid and he,
Mhm.
wanted to make sure
Mhm.
you were okay."
Mhm.
Um, and all these things, which granted, he's not winning, neither one of them is winning parent of the year anytime soon, right? But that relationship between Janine and Abe makes a lot of sense because it doesn't seem like it ended on bad terms.
No,
It
it just
just
ended.
it just ended and they were like, "Okay, it would be better if Rose didn't know about you and people didn't know that you were, you know,
Right.
the person and everything because of the extraneous details of like what you do and stuff."
Mhm.
Um, but so Rose ends up back at Slain Vladimir's. She 100% believes Dimitri is dead. She's dealing with that once again of somebody that she has a lot of feelings for, whether romantic or platonic, right? She's dealing with that world of hurt again.
Mhm.
Um Adrian talks to her and she has that moment of like, "Oh, I'm actually surprised that like I'm feeling something towards you." And so it's kind of
Mhm.
hinting that something is going to happen there. Um Lisa has a moment of like,
I'm
if
not
you're
gonna
gonna go
leave
on a
you
mission again,
again.
like take me
Yep.
with you. I want to be there and help you too, which is why I'm saying there's some character growth with her. But once again, it fundamentally is boiled down to Lisa not wanting
To
Rose
be
away from
alone.
her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
not a ton of character growth, but it's like a step in the right direction. She just needs to continue walking.
Right.
Um Christian and Lisa have broken up because, well, she kissed someone and didn't tell Christian. And even after figuring out what was going on, Christian was like, "All right, I need a moment
Yeah. I need time
to
to think.
think about these things, right?" And he is one of my favorites in the series because after Frostbite, he and Rose have such a not Frostbite, after Shadow Kiss, he and Rose have such a interesting connection
Mhm.
because one, they know that they like fought well together, they like worked as a team, kept each other alive. But
Right.
then in Shadow Kiss, he's the one that she's assigned to, and so they get to see each other without other people around, and they kind of realize that they have a lot in common. They have really good conversations, stuff like that. Um, but it was a really cute and endearing scene when he like hugs her and is like, Lisa and Adrian basically take all of this, like monopolize this title of like caring about Rose and missing Rose and worrying about Rose, but like they're not the only ones.
Right.
Um, And it's such a sweet moment for this like broody emo boy that
He truly is.
I love so much. Like I
Yeah.
think
He's so good.
he's so good and he's 100% the one that like as a teenager I was crushing on Christian.
Yeah.
Because I was naive enough to think that the age gap wasn't a problem, but I was smart enough to realize Like, I would not want to be with a 24-year-old at that age. And so I was like, no, if I'm going to have a crush on someone in this book, it's going to be the person that's my age. And so Christian had my whole heart. And so the book is getting ready to end. Rose gets a nice little package, and it's a stake that she recognizes because it's the one that she drove into Dimitri. And he basically says, like, hey, you missed. Make sure you don't again. We'll have a conversation about this very soon. Love, Dimitri.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it shows that he is going to, you know,
Come after her.
come after her and stuff like that. But it's a very clear, like, I'm not coming after you to change you anymore. I have given up on the idea that you are going to
Nah, you're dead.
join me. You're dead because we cannot both exist in this world, because he's going to consistently be obsessed with the fact that the person he wants, right, did not want to be with him enough. And that's a pride and ego thing. And the Strigoi are
Yep.
going to be, all of the emotions they felt when they weren't Strigoi get heightened. So that pride and that ego he already had, he's like, I can't stand for you to just exist, but not want to be with me, Um, and so he's coming back, and Rose gets this interesting idea that they're going to break Viktor Dashkov out of prison because she has not given up hope on Dimitri, and is like, "Oh, I think there's a way to get him to be not Strigoi
Don't
again."
go anymore.
And so we're kind of rushing towards that. One thing that Rose did in this book that did bother me is that she tells Adrian, like, "Hey, make this love proposal for me." And you're immediately like, "Oh, cool, like she's giving him a shot, whatever." But then like 3 pages later, she like refers to Dimitri again as like her prince. And I'm like, "Man, like pump the brakes on one of them."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because despite what I was saying about like both of them, right? Because I compartmentalize and I'm just like, I'm just going to ignore all ages in the series for my own sanity and well-being, right? Adrian has such a important part in my heart, especially having read the subsequent series where he's a lot bigger of like a plot. He has such an important part in my heart. So knowing that she's basically opened that invitation for him to try and like court her properly, right? But still holding on to this idea of Dimitri, and knowing that Dimitri is endgame, right? Like knowing how this all plays out, not even just from like a this is a reread, but also just
A YA a
it's a
series.
YA novel series, like they authors tend to not change the love interests all that much in a YA. There's some exceptions to this rule, but the rule stands. And so knowing that it's very much like, "Oh, sweet baby boy, you are going to be hurt and you don't deserve to be hurt." Um but knowing what I know, I really look forward to the rest of the series.
Yeah.
But this one 100% is like one of my favorites of the series. The only reason I'm saying one of my favorites is because I remember the rest of the series because they're the more recent reads for me because, they came out when I was in.
A baby.
But yeah, so the rest of the series I don't remember like whether they outshine this one for me,
Hmm.
but this is definitely one of my favorites.
It's my favorite so far,
Because I
hands down.
think like
I liked seeing Rose away from Lisa and like just her being able
as a
to,
as a person, yeah,
yeah, live her best life and do
and
what
not
she
an
wanted to
accessory.
do
Hmm.
and not be just like Lisa's other half
Yeah,
and all of
I
that.
I also really like that the next like this book and the rest all have a like overarching consistent plot,
Mhm.
whereas the other ones felt like episodes.
Standalones,
Yeah,
yeah.
like they felt like
Filler
episodes,
episodes.
whereas like these ones were when like the overarching plot was really starting to overarch, and that was pretty cool. But I had a question that I wrote down for you.
Mm.
If you had read these books when they came out, would you have liked them more?
When did they come out? I gotta put my age
Ooh,
on it.
I don't know.
Hold on.
I think like 2008.
All right, so Vampire Academy came out in 2007
And then
and
subsequently every
2008.
year after. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Given how mentally unwell I was around 2007, 2008, yeah, probably.
Yeah, in 2008 I was 10,
2008, I
so you
was
were 20.
20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you still would have been an adult, but at that nice little stage
I
where
would have been, around Adrian's age. So I could be like,
yeah.
makes sense. Like, it's fine.
Yeah, I think and, putting it really into perspective of, like, your girl was 10, like,
Uh,
100%, you put vampires and romance in a book for me, I'm eating that up, you know?
Right.
Um, but overall, yes, I am heavily looking forward to us reading the rest of the series. If those listening I know that we have the next throwback series planned already because we're gonna dip back into Percy Jackson and everything. But for those listening, if you have another series that is older
Near
in
and dear to
terms of
your heart.
that is near and dear to your heart and you think you would love to hear our thoughts on it, please let us know because after the next Percy Jackson series, we're open, we're free as a bird. Um, but this has been another episode of Margin Mavens. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to show that you love us. Give us that validation.
Yeah, you talking to two people with praise kinks, you gotta actually praise us.
Yeah, the praise needs to be given in order for
Yeah,
there to be a kink.
correct.
But we appreciate you, every person watching and listening, and we will see you guys in the next video.